Today we will talk about one of the Simpsons themes that caught our attention the most, which was the mysterious cannibal that stalks Springfield. It turns out that there are several episodes in different seasons where there are clues or even mention the existence of a cannibal on the loose in Springfield. The references start as early as season 5 and occasionally murky scenes keep popping up where it becomes clear that the cannibal is still on the loose. Like when Marge goes to clean up a crime scene in season 27 where very little is left to the imagination. And while there are a handful of videos covering the mysterious identity behind this cannibal, we had to do our own investigation to close the case once and for all so we don't risk dying demonetized by going around talking about people eating people on a cartoon show. As usual, first we have to gather the information about the direct and indirect mentions that exist of this cannibal, which brings us to the episode Sideshow Bob's Last Gleaming. Said episode begins with Sideshow Bob in Springwood Minimum Security Prison, and when they are about to take the inmates out to another base, Wiggum asks,
"Hey, where is Sideshow Bob and that guy who eats people and takes their faces?"
To which one of the inmates passing by says,
"I'm right here, Chief,"
as he waves to Wiggum and gets into the truck, making this the shortest video of Lulia. Case closed, I'm going to sleep. Yeah, sure, I wish it were that easy. In episode 8 of season 8, titled Hurricane Neddy, a series of misfortunes haunt Ned Flanders, making him lose his faith and become estranged from everyone, so he drives to a psychiatric hospital called Calmwood to check himself in and regain his mental stability. Dr. Foster is the doctor in charge of Flanders' case, and soon the Simpsons are called to visit their neighbor. After the family's arrival at the hospital, Foster pulls Homer aside and tells the rest that they can walk around, but that they should be careful because one of his patients is a cannibal, and see if they can find out which one it is because they could be in for a surprise. Unfortunately, in the rest of the episode we never find out more about the cannibal. We see some patients, but never one that looks like the character from the aforementioned episode, and none of them gives a clear indication of being the man the doctor mentions. And besides, it is curious what Dr. Foster says. I mean, why should they be surprised about the identity of the cannibal? Well, it's possible that it's a deceptive person who appears to be a normal patient or is dressed as part of the staff just to catch his victims off guard, although it could be something else. For the third episode on this list, we skip several seasons, going all the way to episode 11 of season number 16. On a clear day I can't see my sister. Bart takes a walkie-talkie to play a prank on Lisa, who he has been pestering all day on a field trip. While Bart makes some sounds through the device, the police communicate with the kids to tell them to get off that frequency because they are looking for a killer on the loose in the woods. Lou, excited, asks Wiggum to let the kids communicate to lift his spirits, but at that moment a couple of drops from the treetops smudge on Lou's face. When the policeman looks up, he is startled and cries out,
"Oh my God! That used to be a face!"
Then Lisa cuts off and we miss the rest of the gossip. There's another much more brutal and much more recent clue coming from the season 27 episode Lisa the Veterinarian. Marge starts working for the police department cleaning up crime scenes. Halfway through the episode, her assistance is requested to clean a motel room, and although this scene was initially treated as a possible suicide, it becomes clear that this was a murder, as pieces of organs begin to fall from the ceiling, meaning that the victim was dismembered, but several of the organs do not appear at the scene, either because they are still hanging in the room off camera, or because the killer took them away as he has done on other occasions, you know, like with faces. These are several of the examples that we've been able to find throughout the series. However, there are 2 more episodes that are constantly referenced in this theory, and they occur before all the mentions we've made. You see, if we go back to Sideshow Bob's Last Gleaming, it seems certain that the character who gets on the bus is who we're looking for, at least in theory, but who is he? We don't have a name, and the guy never shows up again. Well, to answer that, one of the first theories is that this guy is the dad of a kid named Waldo. And Waldo is someone who shows up in season 5 in Boy Scouts in the Hood, where Bart goes crazy and joins the scouts led by Flanders, which helps him avoid certain responsibilities at his school. One day, a rafting trip to a river is organized, where the Boy Scouts have to bring their dads along for the activity. Homer goes on the excursion, but the raft where our protagonists are takes the wrong path at a fork in the river, which ends up saving their lives. The rest of the explorers took the right path, and among all these children was a boy named Waldo, who could not take his dad because according to Flanders he is locked up in a prison, so not to discourage the child. Ned brings in real-life actor Ernest Borgnine to take the father's place. As Ernest and the rest of the children and their parents travel along the right path, They are watched from a distance by a mysterious figure who appears to be wearing a hat, laughing macabrely and making strange sounds. By the end of the episode, we see that there are fewer members in the scouting party, with Borgnine being the only adult in charge of the children. As this small group of survivors sings around a campfire in a mysterious abandoned camp, a lurking figure approaches them to attack them, closing the episode. It should be clarified that neither Warren, nor Ernest, nor any of those present are seen again in the following 30 seasons, and it is obvious that the figure attacking them is not the bear that appears a few minutes earlier, by the sounds it is making. So the theory as such connects Waldo's dad with the cannibal we see in Sideshow Bob's Last Gleaming. Based on the great argument that they are both in jail, and that surely when he knew that Waldo was going to have that day of coexistence between father and son, he wanted to escape for a while. But after seeing Ernest, he got jealous and anger got the better of him, starting a new slaughter, disappearing several of the members of the scouts and reducing his group until only Ernest was left as a guardian. It's not an entirely far-fetched theory, but I don't see why Waldo's dad would also do the same to his own son after escaping from prison to be with him. And there's also the problem that the theory doesn't fit if we take a closer look. You see, there is another episode titled Mother Simpson, and it's the one just before The Last Gleaming. Here we see the nuclear plant employees clearing a road on orders from Mr. Burns. In a brief scene, we see one of the employees picking up what appears to be a straitjacket from a mental institution, linking him to the cannibal patient the doctor mentions a season later. What the theory proposes is that the cannibal, who would also be Waldo's father, was in the prison as we saw in the bus scene, but then escaped to meet Waldo, whom he ended up murdering along with the rest of the scouts in a psychotic fit, leaving the cannibal loose in the woods around Springfield until he was captured by the police and taken to the mental institution. This doesn't sound like such a bad fit unless we look closely at the sequence of events. Think about it. Waldo's dad would be locked up from the start in Springwood's low-security prison, managing to escape to reunite with his son but ending up on a cruel killing spree. So far the story works. 47 episodes later, a torn straitjacket shows up on the highway, which in this puny theory works as proof that he was sent a psychiatrist or something. But only one episode after that we see him in jail, and yes, he comes from Springwood prison. This killer was never in a psychiatrist, and if he was, we see that the cannibal in question is now in jail, which makes it very odd that the theory then postulates that this is the same cannibal in the psychiatric hospital seen in Hurricane Neddy. If we consider it this way, it is very difficult that it is the same person. It sounds more like there is more than one cannibal in Springfield, which suggests to us that both the Springwood cannibal and the Springcombe cannibal and the killer who stalked the scouts are totally different psychopaths, which may work because throughout the show we have seen more than one with cannibalistic tendencies. One of the most obvious choices is Sideshow Bob, who is one of the most professional criminals in the show and has used surgical skills to remove other people's faces to change their identity, which fits perfectly well with the scene where Lou screams that he saw a face in a tree. Another individual who has also shown a taste for human flesh is Homer, who has even eaten himself in the specials of the House of Terror, although I do not think he has the makings of a serial killer. But who takes the crown of prime suspect is Mr. Burns, who by the way has a theory of his own about his cannibalism, since in another special of the Little House, he takes it upon himself to trick several people from Springfield to go hunting on his property, when in reality he invited them to be his prey in a hunting game. The strongest evidence comes from a season 24 episode titled Dark Night Court. At an Easter celebration, Mr. Burns is watching the children and says, "Look at those lovely children Smithers, all those healthy organs ready to be harvested." After this, he begins to imagine the children's organs drooling and menacingly approaching one of them, to which Smithers restrains him as this is not the time for that sort of thing, not in public. This, beyond being evidence, is a full confession that he likes to eat human organs. The theory as such says that Burns eats children's organs in order to stay alive after such a long time, and it has become routine for him. And under this new context, it seems very likely that it was Burns himself who was responsible for wiping out the Boy Scouts. In the Boy Scouts in the Hood episode, we never see the stalker, but he clearly knew the route the boys were going to take, this being his real target. And it is very interesting that the killer slowly got rid of the adults to leave the children alone. Aside from that, he is obviously a hunter, as he can easily evade the other dangers in the forest, such as the bear. And it also makes sense that being a public figure, Burns would try to cover himself with a cap. You know, in these series they believe that with a cap his identity changes radically. Add in that Mr. Burns clearly had the power and influence to know all about the scouting route, especially keeping in mind that parents like Homer had to ask permission to go on the hike with their children, and this new idea becomes suspiciously compelling, so we clearly have not one but several cannibals stalking Springfield. Burns, who has a predilection for children, another who butchers his victims to change his identity, the one in prison who shares techniques with Sideshow Bob, as well as a patient at the psychiatrist who has escaped several times to continue eating people. I even came to consider that maybe they were all linked in some way, in some sort of cult or something like that, since Mr. Burns might well not always get his hands dirty, being a tycoon and someone who has to take care of his public image, and adding that strange modus operandi of ripping off the faces of the victims. I clarify that this is just a loose idea, but seen this way, in the episode where he sent his workers to clean the highway, he would not only do it to look good publicly, but also to get rid of evidence that can link him to these cannibalistic people, like the straitjacket. After all, these crimes tend to happen a lot in places like this, and as much as they have some cannibals locked up in prisons or mental institutions, there are always more guys on the loose ripping off faces or stealing organs, something that seems very hard for the police to stop as long as an influential person like Mr. Burns is behind it all. And yes, many of these are references to movies like Deliverance or Friday the 13th, but beyond being a reference, it is obvious that these are pieces of a narrative built through different chapters that is worth analyzing to discover what is hidden behind it. And who knows, maybe the story will continue after all these years. With nothing more to say, case closed, I'm going to sleep. Goodbye.